Thank you very much, and it's delightful to follow Florence. The three of us were all defence ministers at exactly the same time. So it's like the Beatles, the reunion of the band getting back together. And I heard, Florence, your comments on Brexit. Look, I never saw our relationship as confrontational. It's competitive in the way brothers and sisters are competitive. And that is, and it has always been, Britain and France's relationship. And I enjoyed sometimes the competition, and I often enjoyed the cooperation that we did together. And of course, as you rightly reference, Britain and France are the two European nuclear powers in NATO, and we would often be determined to work together, both in signalling to our adversaries, but also in making sure our policies are aligned as well. And look, on the subject of Brexit, it's going to be 10 years as of next year. And again, different people had different positions on the UK referendum. But what I would say is our adversaries don't care. I've never, in all my years fighting either terrorists as a former soldier or indeed when I was defence minister, saw ISIS say, well, actually, because of Brexit, we're going to blow up more people in London rather than we are going to in Berlin. I never saw our adversaries sit down in Russia and decide that they weren't going to cyber attack Athens because of Brexit and they were going to go somewhere else. Our adversaries couldn't care less about Brexit. What they were actually focused on is challenging our values and our citizens and indeed everything that we stood for in the world. And that's ultimately what unites us on the architecture of European security. And there is a moment in time, actually, that gives us all great opportunities in Europe, which is, first of all, the new ways of warfare that are emerging from the lessons of the battlefields of Ukraine. Those new ways of warfare are developing platforms and capabilities that do not require exquisite platforms that depend on trillion-dollar budgets emanating perhaps from the United States or any other major powers in Europe. Those are able to be developed and designed and produced in countries like Greece, in countries like Britain, and all over. If we adopt the new ways of warfare, and we are brave enough to do so, I think we can also change the fundamentals of many of our defence industries and give our citizens opportunities to collaborate and grow together in technologies. And also, the messaging from Donald J. Trump and the President of the United States. And it is not messaging that is actually new. It is obviously delivered in his own way. But the one thing, and I think it is probably the only thing, but the one thing that President Obama and Donald Trump agreed on over the last 10 years is that Europe must carry a greater share of its own responsibility and funding for defence. That it is no longer acceptable that the United States unilaterally, effectively funds 70% of all defence of NATO. In fact, if you add the countries outside of the EU to NATO, you discover they fund 84% of defence. That's just not sustainable, and it isn't fair to the 340,000 US troops who, should a war happen or Article 5 be triggered, have to come potentially across the Atlantic to deploy and fight on our behalf. And that is a warning that was given to all of us back in Cardiff in 2014. President Obama asked nicely, Donald Trump has asked in his way. So that is a lesson that I think we have all taken on board and we need to start doing. That involves our domestic politicians not pretending to our citizens that a bridge to Sicily is somehow defence spending, or in my government or the follow-on government of the United Kingdom claiming that broadband is somehow defence spending, or VAT receipts, sales tax is part of it, because it fools no one, least of all our adversaries. It involves real tough political decisions where we may have to cut other spending in order to fund defence and security. We don't yet see that cultural shift, either in my country or many other countries across Europe. Denmark, for example, actually cancelled a public holiday to increase its tax receipts to try and do that. And indeed, in Germany, obviously, they've raised a very large debt bond to fund it. As of yet, in Western Europe, certainly, including the United Kingdom, we haven't crossed that line. But we need to listen to the warnings from the other side of the Atlantic. And in that space, I entirely agree. I don't agree with the tariff policy. I think tariffs only damage the consumers of those countries, of the countries imposing on it. Britain and France doesn't pay the tariff in the United States. American consumers do, and it drives inflation. And you cannot rewrite the laws and rules of economics. But tariffs will have a reverse effect when it comes to us, therefore, deciding to generate our own sovereign industrial capabilities. Now, I now work in private equity, investing in defense and security tech as one of my jobs. And I see the pipeline of the most amazing companies across Europe and in the United States embracing that new technology of AI, quantum, hypersonics, etc. And if we in Europe can unlock funding for those companies and indeed work on our military leaders, our generals and our admirals, to learn the lessons of modern warfare so we fight tomorrow's war, not yesterday's, then I think there's a real opportunity for our industries. But the key word in those industries and the key words for the battlefield lessons of Ukraine is collaborate. We have to collaborate. We have to fuse and share our data, both open source and secret. You cannot, if you invest in an exquisite platform that is so exquisite it cannot speak to any other unit on the battlefield, it is a waste of time. It may be great to buy yourself a Formula One team. It may be the car you invest in. But a modern Formula One car can do 1,200 kilometers on its engine before it has to be completely rebuilt. It needs a pit team before it can actually start its engine. So we have been, for too long, living off a Formula One team type of defense, where we buy highly sophisticated, exquisite, very, very expensive platforms, often above our means, above our budgets, which is why we end up with hollow forces, forces that look good on paper, but can't actually put to sea because we can't afford the crew, or can't afford the electronic warfare. And we need to learn those lessons. And if we do, I think we'll get a much more collaborative European defense policy, a much more collaborative European industrial policy. And I would just say one thing, and there are different countries, obviously, within the EU with different views on this, about defense industrial collaboration. We simply, individually, cannot afford to do it entirely alone. There's about 2 countries in the world that can unilaterally develop those high-value platforms. The United States, the best example of that was the F-22 Raptor, and China. The rest of us need to collaborate. It's why one of the success stories of European defense is MBDA, the missile company. Very strong partners with France, Britain, Germany, Sweden in some types of missiles, and Italy at Leonardo. They work. We can do it. We can produce world beaters if we are prepared to collaborate. And I would just say, and I know there's a debate within the EU, if you decide to cut Britain out of some of that collaboration industrially, great, brilliant. But there aren't many people who spend 60, 70 billion pounds a year on their defense budgets. And ultimately, we are going to be a customer as well. And already we have established the new generation of fighter aircraft, GCAP, is Britain, Italy, and Japan. And I would love Germany and France to be part of that collaboration. We did the Typhoon aircraft together, Germany, Britain, Italy, and Spain. There are opportunities. And ultimately, we've got to remember that we're doing it to defend our values, which we all share, whether you're inside or outside the EU, and our adversaries don't seem to care about. Thank you.